pre-COVID, I was focused quite a bit on shopping centers. And in fact, my last shopping center here in Michigan closed, I think March 31st of last year, which was within a couple of days of the governor shutting down almost everything here. And, I made a very hard pivot at that point into what they call, the essential retailers, which is stuff I was working on anyway, like the quick service restaurant and the tire stores, medical office buildings, things like that. So now, 10, 12 months later, we are seeing the multi-tenant space rebound. And I'm working with a lot of clients of mine who I've kept in touch with who are now interested in selling as they've, stabilized the rents and started to get their tenants, paying every month, or they've filled the vacancies.
This is the real estate investing experience. We get it. Real estate can be rough sometimes, and that's why we bring in the experts to talk about the experiences you won't hear anywhere else with your hosts, John Cohen and Chris Grinzik.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Investing Experience. I'm your host, Chris Grinzik, and with me, as always, is John Cohen. How are we?
Oh, we're good. We're hanging in there. We had a great week of weather, and now it's freezing cold. But other than that, we're good. We are hanging in there.
Yeah. I mean, I know it was getting warmer there, and it was like, okay, winter's over. I mean, down here in Florida, it's been absolutely beautiful. Spent about 4 or 5 hours outside, just like laying around, lounge around. My apartment has like this, it's right on the river. So it's got this really nice, just seating area and like this dock and stuff. So just sitting out there reading, took a nap. It was beautiful. Can't really complain.
That's a beautiful thing. We had some great weather, but as I've told you, it's March. We typically always get, plus or minus, you'll always get one or a snow or a really cold week, and it's dropped down. It's it's not in the 20s, but it's it's 30, but it's windy. Yeah. And we were coming out of like 50, 55, 40, so I was like, it was gorgeous. Now it's like, fuck, let this week end. Actually, there was like some snow flurries before, but
jeez.
It is what it is, right? The Northeast.
Yeah. It was always in New York, whenever the season was like in the middle of changing, you get like that 1 week where it like either gets warmer or colder, and then it reverts back to what it should be. And then at the very tail end, you get like that sniff of the next season, and then it reverts back. So it's like, that's that little tease you guys just got. So hopefully in 3 weeks, it'll be, steadily in the 50s, and, you won't be complaining too much.
Only getting nicer, but
exactly.
Fingers crossed.
I will say it is shocking at where my office is. It's the parking lot. There's all trees. My car is just absolutely covered in pollen right now. Like, I'm just driving and my car is navy blue, and it just looks like this lime green color on the front of my hood. Is just absolutely disgusting. So I am so thankful I don't have allergies, because it would be atrocious.
Yeah, it sounds horrible.
Coming down right now. This is crazy.
No, that sounds like no fun. But listen, warm weather and some pollen or freezing cold. No,
well,
pick or choose.
Yeah, I don't have the allergy, so it's not for me. So I know you have allergies, right?
I do, but it doesn't. I really haven't had many problems with it. So
okay.
It stays like that.
Yeah, nice, cool. Well, let's jump into today's episode. We got a great guest on today. Really excited to have him on. Excited to hear his story, learn from him, and just have a chat. So with that being said, Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for reaching out, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So kick us off. Tell everybody a little bit about, you, your background, your journey through real estate and all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Dan Lewkowicz. I am a commercial real estate broker. I specialize in net lease investment sales, which means that I work with clients who are either own investment property or looking to purchase. And we're talking specifically properties that are rented out typically to national tenants. So on the single tenant space, you're looking at Walgreens, Rite Aids. If you're looking in the restaurant space, or, you're looking at your quick service restaurant, Burger King, Taco Bell. I just sold a Wendy's 2 weeks ago, Starbucks. We also do a lot in the pharmacy, in the automotive repair space. They've been deemed essential retailers. I sell a lot of shopping centers myself, and then we're involved a lot in the medical office space. I have a large medical office building under contract in Iowa, as well as the industrial space and fulfillment centers. So that's in general what I do. My brokerage team at Encore sells about $800 million of property every year. So we're one of the top players, if not the player in that space. And then in addition, I am the co-creator of a course called the CRE Pro course, which essentially teaches people everything that they need to know to become top commercial real estate brokers. I'm sure we'll go into that later. And in terms of my background, I've been in the industry for about 15 years, started off in 2005, created a company with a good friend of mine called Disability Made Easy. And it was a barrier-free home modification company. And I've always been the sales and marketing guy, but I spent a lot of time around our project manager. And it was just incredible to me. I'll never forget the first time that we approached one of those properties. And, he stood outside and I'm looking at this thing thinking like, all the problems it has, how it's functionally obsolete, how it's not going to serve the needs of the owner. And he sits there with his graph paper drawing out. And in 5 minutes, we took something that was no longer useful and turned it into something incredible. So that moment was, I think, really the pivotal moment for me. When it came time to buy my first home, we're talking, middle of the recession, I was looking at property that was, already ready to go. And then I realized that there was so much bank-owned property where I lived. And for a fraction of the price, I could purchase a home from a lender and renovate it myself. So that's what I did. I purchased a house and contracted out all the work myself. And as I did that, I would stay, on site and learn from each of the tradesmen so that I could understand what the process was like to flip a house. And, all my friends would joke with me. They'd say, Dan, what are you going to do when you finish renovating your house? And I would half joke with them. I'd say, I'll buy another one. And that's exactly what I did. I bought another one and another one and another one and another one. And probably at this point, I don't even know, 50, 75 homes I've been involved in, and really got a taste for the single family residential investment space and enjoyed it. In fact, I at one point rebranded my company and brought it into the city of Detroit. We called ourselves Renaissance Real Estate Ventures, started building crews and renovating a lot of houses at the same time. Now, all the while, this was something I was doing on the side. Mm-hmm. In fact, I was working at a title company, and then I was recruited by Amazon as a business development manager there. And eventually I left corporate America and just jumped 100% full-time into real estate investment. And never look back. I mean, it's been up, it's been down, it's been fun, it's been scary, but it's been incredibly liberating. And over time, I migrated into the brokerage space, and I absolutely love it. I absolutely love what I do as a broker. And now to be in the position of being able to train other people and give back has afforded me the opportunity to kind of spread that love and spread that wealth. And I love it. I'm incredibly pleased to be at where I'm at.
Awesome. I love it. I think something that's really interesting for me, especially, but I imagine a lot of people too, is, buying a house at the bottom of the market basically is probably not what a lot of people were doing, right? I know it's a little bit different because, people say a house is an investment, but you're buying something to live in, right? It's really more of just, instead of renting a space to live, you're buying a place to live. So it's always a little bit different. But were you getting a lot of people at the time like, hey, the housing market's in the can, like, what are you doing? Why are you buying a house type of thing? Or that wasn't really the conversation?
Well, there's really two periods that I have to look at. The first period was in the recession, and I was doing this in the suburbs of Detroit. So the prices were still very low. And I don't, just mind you, I didn't do this in 08, 09. I did this as we were coming out. I'm always a fan of buying things as they're coming out of their bottom, because you truly don't know where the floor is until the floor has evidenced itself. So that during that part of the time, I did get some pushback, from people. Hey, you're a sales guy. Hey, you got a degree in psychology. Hey, you don't know anything about building a house. But, it was working. Now, as the time went on, the properties that we were purchasing in the suburbs, the prices were just going up and up and up and up. And there really wasn't nearly as much of an opportunity. So, little secret, the city of Detroit is probably about 7 years behind the rest of the country in terms of the foreclosure crisis. So that's why I rebranded and moved into the city of Detroit. And I cannot tell you how many people told me I was crazy. What are you doing? Detroit is full of drugs and full of gangs and full of violence. And you know what? They're absolutely right. It is. It absolutely is. However, the opportunity in the city of Detroit at the time was just booming. And I thankfully was able to get in, several years before other people did, and really capitalize on that opportunity. But I think at the end of the day, you have to really believe in what you're doing. And there's always going to be naysayers. You know why? Because those people don't have the balls to do it themselves, right? So when they see somebody who does, they have to push them down a little bit to feel better about what they're not doing.
So how do you, when you do have people that are naysayers or telling you this is crazy, doesn't work, how do you build up the self-confidence or the thick skin or whatever it is to kind of maybe not fully ignore them, but to, either believe in yourself more or to tune down the noise and really, justify what you're doing to yourself?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's two ways to do that. Number one is just to come to the table with that already, meaning I'm not looking for that validation, right? I already believe in what I'm doing. That's number one. Now, not everybody's there. I'll give you an example. I had a phone call yesterday with an intern who works for me, and she's just getting her feet wet as a broker, just got her license, getting her first proposals. She's super excited. And she told me that she went home and she talked to her dad and told her dad, and she was like on cloud nine because she just got her first proposal. And he's like, talked her down. He's like, you shouldn't be so excited. It's real estate. It's not going to work out, blah, 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 blah. And you should probably be a doctor. Right. So I told her, I said, I've experienced this too. Oftentimes in life, we look to the wrong people for support. And if we look to the wrong people for support, we're going to consistently get let down. So what I say is make sure that you surround yourself by good people who believe in you and who are supportive. And when you need that extra, pat on the back, or you need that extra reassurance, go to them, go to a support network that's going to give you what you need. Anything else is noise.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. Great advice. Sort of when I first started, my family was super supportive, but they weren't in the space. So their support is, you're doing a great job, good work, keep going. You're working really hard at it. The support that, the people I surrounded myself with were people that were doing it, right? They were buying multifamily property, renovating multifamily property. So like your support network, or the people you go to with those issues, or, even as a broker, I got my first proposal, right? We all know that you got to do a lot of proposals to get listings, but when you surround yourself with the right people, your dad, mom, parent, cousin, friend, they were going to look at you like, listen, you're a dime a dozen, right? Why are they going to list with you? But when you go to the right people and they give you the right guidance and feedback, that's going to be, those days that you wake up a little bit later, you're not feeling the motivation. The motivation is going to come from them, not from the people that are beating you down. So I think it's important that people realize that, real estate is a team sport, right? You need to have people around you, maybe not that you partner with, but that you could bounce ideas off of, because you're going to need them throughout your career to keep you going.
Absolutely. And another thing that I found that helped me in the beginning was I'm really a fan of reaching up in relationships. So when I was starting, I'll never forget this too. This was another, epiphany moment, kind of like the one I told you about with the project manager. But I had a specific system where I would, without, going into too much detail, I would go to the city, I would print out a map, I would drive the neighborhood. And we're talking like my farm area at the time was like a half square mile by a half square mile. And I would drive that area with a notebook, have somebody else driving, write down the addresses of all the distressed properties. And then I was literally door knocking all the time, door knocking. So, I got to know the neighborhood very well. I drove around with that map. I still have it. It's in my room over here. And I had color coded sticky tabs with notes on them. So after getting to know the neighborhood very well, I'd know who was selling and who wasn't. And there was one particular property where I had established a relationship. I thought I was going to get the deal. And then all of a sudden there's a sign up that the property's for sale. I knew it was vacant at that point. And it wasn't like your average everyday brokerage sign. So I said, what the heck, let me call the number. Now I knew that there was somebody who moved from New York and was doing exactly what I had done. And people in the neighborhood would often say, oh, that's your competitor. So I called the number on the sign. The guy picked up, and immediately I said, yeah, my name's Dan Lewkowicz. I know exactly who you are. Let's have lunch. We're going to team up. And immediately I ended up starting to work with him. And our initial deals, either I was just finding the deal for him and wholesaling it to him, or I was finding the deal and using his capital, or I was managing the projects. I was doing one small part of the equation. And this individual became a mentor of mine. And now he's one of my closest friends. So this is someone that still to this day I go to when I want to talk about business situations, and we still do deals together. So I found that by surrounding myself with people who were ahead of me, right, and people that I could do deals with, that helped me to grow. And those are the supportive people that I want in my circle.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Awesome. I think that's a great story. I think just the fact that you're willing to call somebody up, and instead of, looking at them solely as a competitor and being like, hey, they're just on the other side and I'm on this side, of just having that conversation and finding a way to bridge the gap is something that a lot of people should take to heart of, just because somebody's going after the same deals doesn't mean there's not a way for you guys to partner up, work together. Everybody's only got so much bandwidth, right? And there's a crazy, stupid amount of real estate in most people's markets that they're looking in. There's a lot of stuff to go around. So, that's why, when I moved down to Jacksonville, one of the things I started doing was just meeting with other local multifamily guys. And I would say 9 out of 10 were like super open and stuff like that. But I know I can remember one conversation specifically. It was like, we were talking, just passing notes back and forth and, talking. And then, the conversation of brokers came up. He was like, yeah, I don't really know if I should like tell you who I talk to, because we're kind of competitors. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, first of all, I'm going to learn them anyway. And then second, I said, here's the 7 I talk to. Like, you tell me if there's anybody else or not. And it's just, for me, that mindset is one of the best things I love about real estate, because it's a really shared and common trait with a lot of people that are in the space.
Absolutely. It's totally an abundance mindset. And I think that's really great, because there's, you don't feel like you're fighting. You feel like you're collaborating, which is really awesome.
Yeah. And it's funny that one of the other guys I spoke to that I sat down with, he's actually the one that passed me my second deal that I bought. And he said, I didn't do it because I'm not really in that submarket. And I literally just fired my internal property manager. So he's like, I just can't do it. Here, you take a stab at it. And like, didn't ask for anything like that. And it's smart on him, because, now I feel, somewhat indebted to him, and something that comes up next for me, that it's like, if there's this deal in his area that I know he's going to love, I'm going to pick up the phone and call him first, because he's the one that sent the deal my way. So it's like, I know there's going to be things that are going to come my way that don't work for me for one reason or another. And I'm going to pass it along to somebody else. And if you can be top of mind for that person, that's only going to make more sense. So like, even if you want to do it like selfishly, like not even like unselfishly, where you're like, hey, there's enough to go around and it's just nice to help other people. If you're purely selfish by helping out other people with stuff that doesn't really fit your little pocket or what you're looking to do, or, right deal, wrong time, it's only going to come back around to you in one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you balance the broker side of things with the actual investing side of things? Because being a broker and being, highly competitive and doing the volume you're doing, that is not a low, time requirement type of job. You have been doing it for a while, so obviously it gets easier over time. You build up a reputation, and, deals start coming to you instead of you having to chase deals to a certain degree. But how are you able to balance the two?
Yeah, so I actually, interestingly enough, decided to divest myself at the end of 2019 and focused exclusively on brokerage and on activities that are going to build up capital. I feel that I felt at the end of 19, and I still feel the same way, even just even more so, that the market is oversaturated with buyers, and that inventory is tight, and that prices are incredibly high. And I just feel that for me, focusing on my brokerage business, on my course, and I also have a Streamcast show that's on Roku and Apple and Amazon. I just feel that by focusing on those activities, it's going to allow me to build the capital and then deploy it when the time is right. And my barometer at the time, I'll give you an example. A property in Detroit, very nice area, opportunity zone, up and coming, 1,400 square feet, all brick, basement, garage, basically almost a corner lot. 3-bedroom, 2-bath, was able to pick it up for $36,000, put $500 into it. I put someone who was working for me at the time as a tenant. He was paying $1,100 a month plus all utilities and water. Okay. So that's a great cash on cash return. However,
a lot of money.
Yeah. At the end of year one, I said, you know what? Let me just put it on the market. If someone's willing to pay me $49,900, it's worth it. Why would I not sell it now and then pick it up for 30 or 35 grand or less in a couple of years? So I put it on the market. This was like September of 19. And within a week, I had an all cash offer for 60. So at that point, that's just a great example. At that point, my perspective was, why would I not take that cash off the table after, cash flowing it for a year? And then I know that this property is going to be something I can pick up later. I always tell people, people think, oh, well, I'm only in the property for 36,000. So here's my cash on cash return. Yeah, you might be right. But at the same time, you have all that phantom equity. So if you're choosing not to sell it right now at 60, that means that you'd be willing to buy it at 60. So my perspective was take those chips off the table and wait for the next cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a really interesting topic you bring up of like, because that's something I'm going through right now of, when you own a deal for a while, and especially if you have something where, the value increases, whether it's just organically or, you do a value add or some sort of, forced appreciation type thing, if you hold on to it, right? If the value goes up, you can refinance, you have that debt equity, phantom equity, house money type of thing. Do you sit on that, or do you look at what your initial equity was and calculate a cash on that? Because, if you are to sell and take all that equity out, now you've got to repurpose it into something. And it's that whole back and forth of like, hey, do you consistently, transact, fairly quickly, whether that's for, single family and smaller stuff, you can do that within months, or, with commercial multifamily, usually it's a little bit longer, at least a couple of years. Do you repurpose that money, or do you hold on to something because you've created all this value? Now you're playing with house money. You can pull money out and go repurpose it. But it sounds like from your perspective, you're more of the mind of, hey, let's repurpose that capital into something new.
Absolutely. And I think that oftentimes, I talk to a lot of investors, right, as a broker. And oftentimes I come to the conundrum. It's usually with smaller operators, people that own just a few net leased assets, which still could be, $5 or $10 million of assets in their portfolio. And they say, hey, Dan, I'm getting a 10% return because, I bought it for $1 million and it's bringing in 100 grand. And I'm saying, no, that's not the way you look at it, because right now it's worth 1.75 or 2 million. So if you're choosing not to sell it at 2 million with the same, let's say the NOI is the same, which is a 5 cap, right? You got to look at what it's worth today, because if somebody else is willing to pay you that, right, then the valuation is based on what the market says it's worth. So if you're considering what to do with the property, don't look at what you paid for it 5 years ago. Look at what it's worth today. And if you're going to sell it at $2 million and I can get you into something else that's at a 7 cap, now you've increased. Now you've gone from $100,000 of NOI to 140. But people who look at it in terms of what they paid for it, they don't even have their mind open to that possibility.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually a really interesting conversation, because I know my family owns a property in Jersey City.
That's a good point.
And it's an industrial warehouse. It could not be a better product class in today's world, right? Everybody wants industrial space. So they had the opportunity to lease it, or they inherited it when my grandfather passed away. So their basis in the building is $600,000 realistically, and it's a 25,000 square foot warehouse with views of downtown Manhattan. The conversation I have with them all the time is, the building owes you nothing, and you're making X thousands of dollars a month in cash flow, but your cash flow is like a 2 cap based on the value of the property. So you are losing opportunity by not either putting a new tenant in there at a significantly higher and or market rate from where the old tenant is, or if you don't sell it, you have all this income equity build up that you are getting absolutely no return on, because you haven't taken advantage of it either with a sale and or you buy 3 or 4 other properties or whatever you do with it. So I would have that conversation all the time, and they look at me like, well, we don't have a mortgage and we don't have this, there's no risk. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but you're not looking at it the right way, because if that opportunity presents itself, would you pay that price for the same return? And then they're like, well, no, we would never pay that. I'm like, yeah, I know, but that's the value. So you're missing a ton of opportunity by whether it goes into a triple net lease or a 1031, or you just put the goddamn cash in your pocket for a rainy day. I used to have that conversation all the time, but they looked at me like I was crazy.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation to have with someone who doesn't have that perspective or isn't open to it. But I think that, you just have to try your best and show them what it's worth, what their return is, what they could put their money into that might be better suited.
Mm-hmm. So I will say,
and the fact that, by the way, keep in mind that phantom equity can be leveraged, right? So if there's $3 million of phantom equity, and let's just say you're putting, 30, 35% down, you could theoretically leverage $10 million total. So really, and get a return on that. So with today's rates, I mean, that's another part of the conversation. I find that when I take it that next step, it opens people's minds up a little bit, because now it's not like, oh, it's just, just a little bit of phantom equity. No, it's phantom equity that could be leveraged, and you could be getting a return on everything.
Yep. So when you're having that conversation with that person, and obviously it's the brokerage side, so I understand, that part of it. How often does somebody say, okay, let's, instead of selling because I still like this asset, do I just refinance? Because, the scenarios you're talking about is, they have, their current loan is, like 50% or less. So they probably have a high ability to refinance, still pull out a good chunk of change, hold on to their current asset, take that money tax-free, and either just take it or put it into another property. How often would you say people go that route versus just selling and buying something new?
If I had to guess, I would say out of 100 times, maybe
high level,
maybe 50 times they keep it, the situation as is, maybe, 40 times they decide to sell, or 35 times they decide to sell, and 10 to 15 times they decide to refinance. Because keep in mind, when they refinance, there are fees that are associated with that, number one. And number two, oftentimes once their mind is open and they see that they could leverage that phantom equity, and this asset, it has a strong demand in the market and can sell at a very competitive cap rate. Well, hey, now if I can take this property based on the current value, and let's say it's at a 5 cap, and they can trade into something else that's, at a 6 or 6.5 cap, now you've got that additional benefit of having that change in cap rate, and therefore the change in income that the property is producing. So at that point, it becomes, a consideration that their cash flow can actually be even more increased by doing the 1031 and selling the property.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the piece of the good, remember when you refinance, especially in these other product classes, unlike multifamily, let's say you have a 15-year lease. You can't always refinance a commercial property at max leverage, because it might not cover debt wise if your tenant's in there for a certain period of time. So where you might be able to refinance and pull out $1 million of $3 million or $2 million, it might make that property significantly more riskier to you as an individual than just an outright sale and a purchase at a better cap rate, or a purchase with less debt on the next property. So those are things to keep in mind, because in multifamily, you have tenants moving every single month, every single year.
Right.
Commercial space, a lot of those tenants have 10, 15, 20 years left. So, and with predefined escalation. So you can't always, it's not a dollar for dollar. So the example that Dan just gave is perfect, where you say, okay, well, if I could sell at a 5 and buy at a 6, I'm going to pick up a ton of opportunity.
Exactly.
Because my refinance is going to be hamstringed by what my property generates in income. So you are capped a little bit. So if they have the open mind and you can help them walk that through, it's game changing when, you've owned property for 15 years or 5 years or 20 years, because you're typically worth a lot more today than you were when you bought it 9 out of 10 times, or 9.5 out of 10 times.
Yeah, exactly. And, I consider myself to be an advisor, not just a broker. I like to add value. I find that if I add value, everything else follows. So, we have an in-house lender. So I find that people make the best decisions when they're most informed. So I'll go ahead and with the help of my in-house lender, put together a spreadsheet showing them, hey, this is what it's going to look like if you keep the property as is with all that phantom equity. This is what it's going to look like if you refinance at this rate. Okay, these terms and this amortization, because remember, the amortization of the loan is going to have a big impact on what their cash on their levered cash return is. If it's 15-year amortization versus 25 or 30-year amortization, the payment is going to go down significantly. So I'll show them that on a spreadsheet, and then I'll also show them, hey, if we take this capital from the sale and all that phantom equity, and then we purchase something at this market cap rate, and you lever it under these terms, this is going to be your return. So I think it's very important to put all that information in front of them so that I can be a good advisor, and then they can make a choice based on clear and transparent data.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask a question, because I think a lot of people don't realize this. On the multifamily side, when you refinance, there's often a little bit stricter on terms of like debt service coverage and, LTV and stuff like that. Is that the same for these other sectors where, for multifamily on a new purchase, you may have to hit a 1.25 coverage ratio but on a refinance, it might be a 1.3 or 1.35. So naturally your debt is going to be less. Is it the same? And so they're actually able to buy more, assets in terms of dollars because your leverage can be higher, or is it not the same?
So it's different than multifamily insofar as there are other variables that you just don't have in multifamily.
Mhm.
And two of the most important variables in terms of the actual underlying asset are going to be the strength of the guarantor and the lease term. So like as an example, and that's going to dictate other variables. So as an example, of the three retail pharmacy chains, CVS, Rite Aid, and Walgreens, the better two in today's market are Walgreens and CVS. Rite Aid is a little bit more of a struggle. If I can get a client, a Walgreens or a CVS that has 7 years or more on the lease, I can get them 25 or 30-year amortization right now. Okay. And I believe on 30-year amortization, they're going to need to be at like 64% loan to value. I think if they want to go all the way down to, or up to 70% loan to value, it'll be a 25% amortization. So, I can't get them the same debt terms on a Rite Aid because Rite Aid is not as strong of a guarantor. Mm-hmm. So those factors are going to weigh in very heavily. And those are two factors that you don't really have when you're looking at the underwriting of a multifamily property.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got to imagine too, that debt and everything as well weighs into what the values of the property are. Like I would imagine the cap rate for a Rite Aid versus a CVS and Walgreens is going to be slightly different.
Oh yeah, and for those reasons, right? Because it's just a simple risk return, right? A Rite Aid is a riskier product because they don't make their own pharmaceuticals. They don't have their same health systems in store like CVS has, Minute Clinic and Aetna Health, and Walgreens has some services in store. So the likelihood, so to speak, from a risk perspective of a Walgreens or a CVS staying in business versus a Rite Aid when everything else is the same, right, is higher. So therefore, the risk is lower, and therefore the cap rates are lower, and the prices are going to be higher. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Now, I was going to say keep in mind, because I know we're talking a lot about incorporating leverage, but when you take the sheer fact of sell for a 5 cap, buy your new product at a 6 cap, if you take debt off the table and just go straight cash, to keep it in layman's terms. If you sell your property for that you bought for $1 million for 2 at a 5 cap, and you go take that $2 million and buy a 6 cap, you will inevitably generate more money on your 6 cap purchase at $2 million than you do on your 5 years ago 5 cap purchase on $1 million, because you're taking more cash at a higher return. So exactly. When you start throwing leverage into it, eyes glaze over because people think risk and all that. But when you just look at it apples to apples, your property that's built up so much equity at a 5 cap is now operating probably at a 2 cap because it's worth $2 million instead of when you bought it for $1 million. You're picking up a ridiculous spread. So that's the other thing to keep in mind, just trying to break that down for, the average listener, just so they understand that, because you're when you bought it at $1 million and it was generating 100,000 a year at a 10 cap, whatever it is, now it's operating at a 5 cap. So you can pick up the $2 million at the same cap rate and get the same return. If it's a little bit higher, you're going to make more money.
Exactly right. And I like to look at it first in the exact terms that you said. Let's look at it for a cash on cash value. Leverage is just going to be that instrument that allows you to increase that cash on cash return. But again, keep in mind, we want to focus. So like I've got a client, for example. This is actually funny. The same guy I told you about who I called on the sign, right? That was my competitor, and we joined forces. I now represent him as a broker. So we look at a lot of pharmacy deals together. And for those, since he's syndicating deals, the cash on cash return is like the most important thing. So my parameters for him are a Walgreens or a CVS with 7 years or more left on the lease. And I try to get it at a cash on cash return at an 8 cap, because if there's 7 or more years on the lease, I can get him 30% amortization, 30-year amortization. And now his cash on cash return might get up to a 13 cap, something like that. So for some clients, it's important to focus on that because that's all they care about. But in general, especially when you're talking in layman's term, always focus on cash return. And then you can utilize these debt vehicles to lever that up significantly.
100%.
Yeah. I think you just touched on something that's really interesting too, is that, when you're looking for deals as a buyer and you're trying to communicate with brokers, really understanding like what you're looking to accomplish and like how you're looking to accomplish it is so big. Because I'm sure, I know you have the pre-existing relationship and stuff, but back to what I was saying where, my second deal came from somebody else. it's because I've known exactly, the type of deal I want to buy in this marketplace, and being able to communicate that and have it stick in somebody's head. I mean, it's the same thing. You just, that's what you just said is such a narrow bucket. And I'm sure he looks at other things, right? But like, one deal that like, okay, if it fits this bucket, I know exactly who's buying it and I know they're going to execute. Having that capability on the reverse side of, as a buyer, as somebody that's trying to come across and get deals done, is so powerful, because it makes your life easier as the broker or somebody trying to sell a deal.
Yeah, that's just essentially, that is all we do, is match people up with deals. So it's so important to keep a good handle on who wants what, and who has what, because essentially I'm the bridge between the person that has something and the person that wants something. And I have to make sure that when I bring those people to a bridge, it's the two people that are most likely to proceed forward with a transaction.
Mm-hmm. I just had this conversation yesterday because we were talking about brokers and buyers, and let's use Jacksonville, right? As Chris said before, there's 7 people you want to talk to, 7 brokers, right? And then a whole bunch of wholesalers and a whole bunch of, all the other stuff. So we had the conversation because we're getting some values on one of the properties that we're doing a complete rehab on, just to get a ballpark idea. And he said, I don't know if I would list it with this guy. And I said, well, out of all the buyers out there, do you think one broker has a better relationship with not the guy that's going to pay the most? You want to pick the broker, like you said, that bridges my expectations of sale with the buyer's expectation. So maybe you don't list with this guy because you don't think your expectations are aligned. But if your expectations are aligned with your broker, you pick the broker that's going to take your expectations to market, not the broker that's just telling you the highest price or whatever it is. Because at the end of the day, the broker's job is to facilitate the transaction to get the most probable buyer with the seller to the finish line, not just bring in the high flying offer, or, I'm going to sell this off market to my friend because, I know he's a closer. That's the game of the broker. Like you said, you're a matchmaker for the most likely buyer with the most likely seller. And when you take that, that's probably what makes your life a lot easier. When you have that database and you're looking at it and you're like, oh, I know Mr. Jones is, he's getting ready to sell because he always sells when he has 5 years left on his CVS. Well, now you know the people that you want to bring that deal to. You don't bring that to a guy that wants 7 years left unless you've exhausted the other options. And now you can get it at a 8-9 cap or a 10 cap, because you know that you can trade cap rate percentage for time on a lease or whatever it looks like.
Yeah. And I'll give you a perfect example. It just happened last night. I just sold a Wendy's property about 10 days ago. And we sent out an email blast saying, hey, just sold this Wendy's property. And it was a hot deal. 98.25% of list price, from contract to close was 46 days. It was as clean as could be. Super easy buyer. So I received a bunch of emails from people. This one guy reached out and he said, hey, I'm looking for a Wendy's deal, somewhere in the 5.5 cap range, close to 20 years left on it, in Michigan. So immediately a light bulb went off in my head, because I've got 2 clients, both of whom do not want to list the properties, and they fit those parameters to a T. So I immediately, obviously I had him sign a confidentiality agreement, but I immediately put these 2 offerings in front of him. And last night we went under contract on another Wendy's deal, only because I knew, hey, here's a seller that has these exact terms, but will not market the property because he doesn't like the exposure. He doesn't want, Wendy's corporate to know. He doesn't want his competitors to know. He wants everything hush hush. And here's a guy who wants a property that's in Michigan. And these people would have never, ever, my buyers in California, they never, ever would have come across each other were it not for that bridge that I built between them.
And that's the nature of the beast. Just from your position, the knowledge of the sellers and the knowledge of the buyers, and pairing that together is how you transact with how you do transact. Listen, anyone could sell a deal, right? They sell themselves, but when you have that intimate knowledge of how to go about matching the right people, that's typically when you're adding the most value to a situation.
Yeah, exactly.
So what are some tips for like people that are a little bit newer, as they're trying to find deals, talk to brokers, and like put their best foot forward? Where, look, everybody getting started and new isn't gonna be able to have the conversation of somebody that's been doing it for 5-10 years. It's not the case. And more often than not, a broker that's been doing it a while is going to find out fairly quickly through the conversation whether you are somebody that's been doing it for 10 years or for 6 months. But like what are some things that people can do to help kind of bridge that gap or create a better relationship or, have a better conversation when they're earlier on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get asked that a lot, actually. So there's a few things that you can do. So number one is just be completely transparent. If you're not ready to buy for 6 months, or if your parameters are so specific that a deal has to check all of these boxes until you're going to pull the trigger, say that up front. Because if somebody comes to me and says they want X, Y, or Z, and I show them 10 deals that fit within that spectrum and they're not pulling the trigger, now I'm going to start saying, hey, what's going on? Are you really serious? So be transparent. That's the most important thing. I do vastly more seller rep than buyer rep. Typically, I only do buyer rep if they're a past client or if they came referred, because of some of the challenges that I've experienced as a broker working with buyers. I see you guys smiling a little bit over there because you know exactly what I'm talking about. So be transparent, be clear, and then I would say also what you would expect out of me, I think I should be able to expect out of you, and that is that you're going to answer your phone or you're going to return my calls, and that you're going to perform as you say that you will. So if you're offering on other property and you're not sure that you're going to buy this one, tell me that, because keep in mind, as a broker, I'm reaching out to my clients or other colleagues of mine and getting involved in their deals for you. And if something goes sour, something goes sideways on the deal, that doesn't just look bad for you, it looks bad for me. So I think that it's very important to have that transparency and to be clear and to be upfront and to keep those lines of communication open. I think that, especially, in today's market, it's a hot market. If you're looking for a good broker to represent you, I think that you have to conduct yourself in an appropriate way so that broker will go to bat for you. And I think it's also important, if you're working with other brokers or looking at other deals, be transparent about that as well. And that being said, if I know that I'm the only broker working for you, I'm going to work a lot harder, because I know that, you're going to see what I show you, you're ready to buy, and you're going to work with me.
Mm-hmm. 100%. No, I think you broke it down great. I know, one thing when I have that conversation with people that I say is, oftentimes when you have the first conversation with a broker, there's a deal they're working on or loosely working on that you can take a look at, and they'll probably send it to you. Even if fairly quickly it's not the right deal, at least take a look at it and take the time to actually look at the deal and then call that person back pretty quickly and just have the conversation of hey, why does this work? Why doesn't this work? And if they tell you about it on the phone in that first call, and it's hey, I want, only CVS or Walgreens and it's a Rite Aid, you say, hey, look, I don't think it's going to work because I typically look for this, but send it to me and I'll tell you what I think. And, maybe if there's something else that really is, appetizing, I can make it work, type of thing. And then you call them back and say, look, I looked at it. And like I said, I'm just really looking more for that thing. Or maybe if it's multifamily, hey, I'm looking for post 1980s construction, or, I'm really looking in these submarkets. But it's that follow-up and saying in that conversation, hey, send it to me, I'll take a look and I'll get back to you. If you actually do that, it starts to build up, kind of that relationship capital of hey,
Yes.
okay, yeah, it's not that tough to do that. So it's not all of a sudden, they trust everything you're going to say, but it's those little things over time that, just give you a little bit more of that relationship capital to go further.
Yeah, absolutely. The feedback is huge. I would agree with you 100%.
Mm-hmm. And it's vice versa, right? There's tons of brokers that aren't as good at their job, or, are just flat out not good at their job, and, vice versa, right? So it's if you are looking to work with people, whether you're going to list a deal or buy a deal, if, you say, if somebody says they're going to do something and they don't really follow up, it's the same thing as well. So, like you said, it's kind of both sides of the coin, just kind of back to the, how would you want to be treated if you were on the other side, and, vice versa. Nobody wants to get the wool pulled over their eyes or jerked around, or, tell somebody else one thing and then, get torn away, because that's the quickest way to kind of either ruin or tarnish that relationship. And once you get burned, it's a lot longer to build it back up than to just, be upfront from the beginning.
Exactly. 100%.
Yeah. And I think that's tough too in the beginning, right? Because so many people want to be doing bigger things, be doing better things, and want to be doing it quicker. And it's not always easy to just, come out and say, hey, I'm newer, but I want to get into the space and I'm looking to build up, because I feel like they're just going to tell me to go F myself, and that conversation is not going to go well. And look, I think unless you're talking to a senior position broker at a, national firm, yeah, maybe they'll kind of not give you the time of day or pass you off to somebody else, but you're not really in the position to be talking or working with them anyway. You want to be matched up with somebody who's going to match the type of stuff you're going to doing. So by trying to front or, portray yourself in a way that maybe is not 100% honest, you're just going to be working with somebody that isn't suited for you anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So going into the future, just going back, you said you took stuff out in 2019 and, you've kind of been on the sidelines, waiting. What are you thinking about with today and everything that's going on? Like, are you thinking that maybe there's some opportunity soon? You think the market's still got, room to run or is very high? Are you looking at different sectors or subsectors? Like what are the thoughts in your head right now?
Yes, it's a good question. I mean, I tell people I'm a recovering house flipper. Like I even joke with my fiance. We walk down, streets and we see this house and it's like, oh man, would love to buy that and renovate it. And that's how certain deals have come about. We've gone for a run or go for a walk and we see a house that's, is in need of love and there goes your next deal. So, I guess I would have to see prices normalize. I would have to see vacant property trade for reasonable prices. I think in the single family space, at least in my market, vacant property is selling for ridiculous prices. So I would have to see that is, kind of normalizing to a certain extent. In terms of what I would do, I love the flipping model because, I'm never holding a property for more than 3 months. And even if the market is rarely going to take a huge correction in that short of a term, plus I'm always buying at a significant discount with a large cushion. So that's something that I would definitely be interested in at a certain point when the market does recorrect. I would consider single family rentals. I also like the idea of syndications of multifamily. And I really happen to like West Michigan shopping centers. I've sold a few of those, and I really like those. They, a lot of these shopping center deals have strong tenants, a good, diversified lease rollover in terms of when the leases expire, and they have built-in rental escalation. Some of them 2 or 3% annually. So, you take a deal, even if you're buying it at a 5, let's say it's a multi-tenant retail, you're buying it at an 8 cap today, but there's 3% annual rental escalations. After 10 years, you could be at a 10 cap, you could be higher. So I do really like that idea. And I'm just kind of trying to stack as much as I can so that when that happens, we can swoop in and capitalize.
Mm-hmm. I hear you. When you're looking at some of those retail sectors, is there a big conversation going on with like the way tenants are going and how things are changing just with the whole, not only, e-commerce and stuff, but especially more recently with COVID?
Yeah, sure. So, pre-COVID, I was focused quite a bit on shopping centers. And in fact, my last shopping center here in Michigan closed, I think March 31st of last year, which was within a couple of days of the governor shutting down almost everything here. And, I made a very hard pivot at that point into what they call, the essential retailers, which is stuff I was working on anyway, like the quick service restaurant and the tire stores, medical office buildings, things like that. So now, 10, 12 months later, we are seeing the multi-tenant space rebound. And I'm working with a lot of clients of mine who I've kept in touch with who are now interested in selling as they've, stabilized the rents and started to get their tenants, paying every month, or they've filled the vacancies. But yeah, there's major concerns because that market was pretty dormant for quite a bit of time in 2020. And a lot of those tenants stopped paying rent or went out of business or vacated. So, there's a stabilization period that's going on in multi-tenant retail. However, it's a space that's very, very popular. And I don't see that changing. The only thing that I see changing in that space is kind of, as you alluded to, the fact that at least in these major shopping centers like the malls that have large vacancies, I do foresee industrial properties like last mile fulfillment centers moving into some of those larger vacant big boxes.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna question that, and you sort of touched on it. But with COVID that just happened, have you seen more reluctance? Even like the CVS and the Walgreens, they've sort of withstand it because they're essential. But have you seen more people asking, what back rent looks like? What are they doing to make it up? Or are people just underwriting these things to be, I don't say obsolete, but I'm just going to assume that's vacant, right? Like, how are people looking at these properties today with a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, right? Some states, Florida, I believe, Texas, they're 100% open, right? You can do what you want. But, some of these other areas, the Midwestern, the Northeast, where there's still restrictions, how are people going about, a store that may not be doing business right now, or they just, the delinquency is through the roof, but they're still operating? Like, how are you advising, and what are you seeing from sellers and buyers?
Yeah, good question. So I just sold a deal this month that had that some very similar situation to what I think you're referring to. It was a fast food restaurant, and they had asked for 2 months of rent abatement in the middle of the pandemic. They got that. They paid up one of the months immediately, and then the deal was there was a lease addendum that stated that second month, that full month of rent that was abated, they would pay 1/6 of it every month: January, February, March, April, May, June. So we closed in March. So they had just made January, February, March. There were 3 months left. So what we did in that deal is, it was a little bit risky for the buyer, but the seller, so to speak, if you think about it, was really owed that rent. Now he sold the property. The new buyer, in theory, should be collecting that rent. It's a risk, but the buyer was willing to credit the seller at closing for that 3/6 of a month of rent, or 1/2 of a month of rent. So that's common. Again, some buyers are going to look at that and say, well, hey, I understand it should have been yours, but now it's our responsibility to collect it. Maybe we'll credit it to you at a discount. So that does occur. A lot of the properties and assets that we work with are rented by large national tenants. And those tenants, I'll give you an example. TBC, which is the guarantor for National Tire and Battery, Tire Kingdom, and Big O Tires, in my experience, about 90 to 95% of the owners across the country were approached by TBC in the middle of the pandemic asking for some type of rent deferral. And that deferral, I believe, was a 3-month deferral. And then they were going to pay double rent. I believe it was October, December, January. So same thing, rental credits, or we're going to have to be issued. And again, it's really transaction dependent, because again, that rent was technically owed to the previous buyer. Now the new seller has the responsibility to collect it. Are they going to credit it dollar for dollar? Are they going to say there's a little bit of a risk and they're going to adjust that based on that risk? So it really depends on the asset. And then obviously there's more complicated situations, like in the multi-tenant. I'm underwriting some deals literally as we speak, where, the tenants are still paying half rent. So that becomes much more complicated, because how do you value that? Can I underwrite their P&L and their rent roll based on what they were collecting, what they are collecting, what they might be collecting? It's very difficult, because we don't know what's going to happen with those tenants. Clearly they're struggling. Otherwise they wouldn't have been given that abatement. So, you really have to be very, very careful and understand, almost lease by lease, what's going on with that tenant. What is the likelihood that they're going to pay? And how much is, in back rent? What's the likelihood that's going to be, given to the new buyer? So, we're all really tiptoeing on territory that is uncharted. And I think that we're all working together as best we can to make sure that the solutions that we come up with are as fair and equitable to all parties as possible.
And I'm sure you're seeing buyers in the market just blood in the water, like, go get me a 15 cap,
It's, you'd think so, but the market, there was such a flight to quality, meaning in the net lease space, you had hundreds of billions of dollars that was across all asset classes. And then when the pandemic hit and we had this new term of essential retailer, all that money went away from multi-tenant and into essential retail. So we had this flight to quality of everybody wanted quality assets, quality assets, quality assets. And right now, I'm telling you, the things that are going on the market, they're getting sold in a day or two. We're seeing, offers above asking price, which is in our market is not common. We're seeing people that are putting earnest money deposits that go hard day one, right? So at this point, are there deals? Yeah, but cap rates have compressed and gone down in many asset classes, in the pharmacy space, in the automotive repair space, in the dollar store space, in the grocery store space, and in the industrial space. So really, I look at it like we're trying to make hay when the sun is shining. And even though the rest of the world has been in a pandemic, for us, our heads have been down, our feet have been on the gas, and this has been the best. I mean, brokerage, as a commercial real estate broker, there's never been a better time.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I think it's really good intel to everybody listening. I'm trying to think what other tips out there can you give anybody that are looking at these deals? You've touched on a ton of stuff. I mean, I agree. I think that with everything that just took place, there's major shifts on mindset. I mean, we're looking at a deal right now. It's a 72 unit deal. The owner has historically been a triple net guy, but he was in a shitty 1031 in March of last year or April of last year. And with all the uncertainty in that space, he bought this and he just wants to get out for basically cost because he doesn't do this. So he's not an operator of multi. So we have this deal. It's a little small for us, but this guy wants to go back into the triple net space and he's willing to take a little bit of a discount because that market's been ridiculous. And it seemed to be pretty resilient, especially in the spaces that are essential and people need, right? Those stores are going to do well.
Yeah, I mean, no question. And, I think that the insanity that is multifamily today with cap rates going, I mean, I'm talking to people in the industry that are buying things at 3-4 caps. I mean, it's like, why not go into a Chick-fil-A or a McDonald's, right? That's, absolute triple net, no expenses, nothing's going wrong, national tenant, like 20-year lease. And I just think that I would be weary because, I see a time of opportunity on the horizon for multifamily as well. And I think we're just starting to see what's happening because if you look back at what happened in March of 2020, there were a few interesting things. Number one, the SBA allowed for a 6-month deferral on all of their loans. All right. And at the same time, 2020 was ridden with rent abatements and eviction moratoriums. Well, in the end of September, I believe September 27th, the SBA abatement expired, right? But all these landlords, many of them, depending on the market and the class of the building, they're not able to collect rent and they're not able to evict. So I believe that at the end of September, early October, this cycle got started where there's distressed landlords who are now having to pay their mortgage, but they're unable to collect rent or evict. So they're just, running into a depletion of reserves. And I believe that there's going to be, a barrage of foreclosures that'll hit the market in the next quarter or so. And I think that that's going to provide for some major opportunity for, investors like yourselves who are looking to pick up property. So I'd be weary of overpaying when I believe the market is going to produce very shortly distressed assets and distressed debt.
I can definitely see this shoe dropping down. I mean, for example, there was a deal on the market. They were looking for 14.4 on a loan assumption. We offered $9 million. I got that deal sent to me last night at $17 million. It didn't sell. So, a girl texts me and she says, I got this deal, 1980s product in Jacksonville for $170 a door. And I was like, okay. She's like, are you interested? It's a 4 cap. I'm like, you've given me a vintage and a price. Maybe it's in the fucking greatest location in the world. I said, it's location. Send it to me. She sent it to me. I'm like, you should stop sending this to anybody because it was just on the market and it did not sell and the price just went up 30%. So you're wasting your time. But I think people are grasping at that last straw on some of these struggling deals. There are deals that are crushing it, but I do agree. I think that, smaller mom and pops where maybe they had more relationships and tenants weren't paying, things are going to start to happen now that the restrictions are going away. So evictions are going to pile up. More will happen soon. I don't think it's World War III, but I think there will be a little bit more distress, in the right spaces. Like you said, it's market specific, it's jurisdiction specific, but at the end of the day, there will be some problems that come down the road. But I'm on the page. You find me a Chick-fil-A at a 5 cap, I'll take that over a multifamily at a 3 all day.
But I'm not going to because, people don't know this, but in terms of, if you look across the board at the different quick service restaurants and you look at average sales volume, McDonald's is number 2 at like maybe around 2.2 million. The average Chick-fil-A is over $4.5 million in sales and they're closed on Sundays. So it's insanity. It's insanity. Back to your point a second ago, this also concerns me. The numbers that I'm hearing for cap rates for multifamily are so insanely low in some markets. My concern is debt is very cheap right now, but I think people have gotten so excited. And I think the syndication rage has gotten so large that people are getting into deals where there's no room. meaning there's no room for management fees. There's no room for CapEx. There's no room for vacancy. And guess what? Once those interest rates start creeping up and those properties have to be refinanced, I think that's a very dangerous position to be in.
The CapEx component by itself, we had a guest on earlier, literally right before you, talking about a 1960s built deal. And it's a 1960s built deal. You got to realize that property is approaching 60 years old. So when you buy that deal at a 6 cap, a 5 cap, a 4 cap, debt is your friend pending how much leverage you put on it. But as interest rates go up, as that property needs to be repaired, you're not going to be able to pull the lever of debt to fix your problem. It's going to be money out of pocket, or the deal will start to fail or run in place. Yeah. And, she's doing a phenomenal job, and they had a great renovation budget. But we see those deals all the time. And the conversation I have is, you guys, I know what it costs to operate a 1960s built deal for 4 years. I know what my capital is going to be. If you're trying to tell me that that's going to just all of a sudden change with rising everything, right? Cost of labor is going up, management fees are going up, insurance is going up, taxes are going up. With all these things going up, am I just to expect CapEx is not going to go up? So you're 100% right that, there's such little margin when you see people underwriting to 96% occupancies and 250 below the line. Like, that stuff's only going to last for so long before those deals start to fail or not work or just not produce. It doesn't mean they're going to lose money, but it means they will stop because they won't be able to use the debt lever to save them, which people have been able to use. So it's a great point to bring up. I'm on the page as well. That's why it's been very tough to find a deal because, I've had brokers tell me, you're too knowledgeable on the property. I'm like, well, so are you looking for the idiot? Because if the idiot's out there, I have a couple properties, bring me some idiots, right? Let's sell some shit.
Right. Yeah.
100%. But I do think that's a great place to wrap up. I think this was awesome. So Dan, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insight, your knowledge and experience. People want to get in touch with you, follow you, learn more about you. Where can they do all that stuff?
Yeah. So the best way is on LinkedIn. Just, my first name is Dan, last name Lewkowicz, Lewkowicz. Happy to give out my cell phone number as well. It's 248-943-2838. Again, 248-943-2838. If anybody has net lease property, single or multi-tenant, and they want to know what it's worth, reach out. Myself and my team will put together a complimentary, no obligation value proposal for you at any time. And if there's anything I can do, if you want more information about our course, or you just want to talk shop and real estate, please reach out. I'm always happy to provide as much value as possible.
Awesome. Guys, definitely go hit them up. Can't stress it enough. But thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you're not already subscribed, it would mean the world to John and I if you would do so. And if you are, please send it to someone that would get a tremendous amount of value from this episode. Dan, once again, thank you so much for coming on. This is awesome.
My pleasure.